Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, January 24th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. and Israel launched their most significant military drills in history. So on Monday, the U.S. and Israel launched massive military drills, which one Pentagon official described as the most significant exercise between the United States and Israel to date. So that's a pretty big statement there. And these drills do seem very big. They are called the Juniper Oak 23. They started Monday. They're going to last until Friday. And they involve about 6,400 U.S. troops, 1,100 Israeli troops, and over 140 different types of aircraft and 12 warships. So it's pretty big. The exercise is taking place in Israel and the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and it is seen as a message to Iran and other so called U.S. adversaries in the region. The different types of aircraft include B 52 bombers, fighter jets, and refueling aircraft, and a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group is among the warships participating. According to U.S. Central Command, the drills will involve a large scale live fire event. So General Michael Kurilla, he's the head of U.S. Central Command. He said, quote, Juniper Oak is a combined joint all-domain exercise which improves our interoperability on land, in the air, at sea, in space, and in cyberspace with our partners, enhances our ability to respond to contingencies, and underscores our commitment to the Middle East, end quote. So this Pentagon official, an unnamed official who spoke with NBC, said that the drills show that the U.S. has not forgotten about the region, even as it is focused on Ukraine, on its proxy war against Russia, and it's also focused on a military buildup in the Asia Pacific aimed at China. This official said, quote, we still have the excess capacity to be able to flex to another high priority area of responsibility and conduct an exercise on this scale, end quote. So this official insisted that the drills were not aimed at any particular country, but he did say that they will send a message to countries like Iran. But I think it's pretty clear that this is very much aimed at Iran, and just because it comes at a time of such high tensions between the U.S. and Iran, it's something, most of our focus has been on the war in Ukraine, for good reason, but things between the U.S. and Iran and Israel have been, are really bad right now. Over the past few months, the U.S. has been increasing sanctions. There's no chance of the nuclear deal being revived and the U.S. lifting sanctions. The U.S. has been expressing support for protesters inside the country, and U.S. officials have even threatened military action. The Pentagon official said that Iran would take notice of the U.S. and Israel's capability and would likely respond. The official said, quote, my guess is the next time they do a military exercise, they'll say, even if it was planned for months, they'll say it was in reaction to this, end quote. The drills also come at a pivotal moment in Israel as the new government under Netanyahu is stirring controversy over their, planned judicial overhaul and their plans to significantly expand settlements in the West Bank. So I think this drill shows that, we got your back on, Israel, no matter what, no matter who's in charge over there. This official said, quote, this is a sign that we continue to have Israel's back at a time where there's a lot of turbulence and instability across the region, end quote. So these huge drills, they took only a few months to organize, and they came after Israel's former army chief, Aviv Kochavi. He just stepped down. He was just replaced. But he went to Washington, D.C. back in November, and he met with all, just about every high-level U.S. official you can name. And after this trip, he said that the U.S. and Israel were going to expand joint military cooperation. And he also said that he pressed them for the U.S. and Israel to jointly plan attacks on Iran. So what's interesting is that this comes after Israel was just brought under CENTCOM, Central Command's area of responsibility in 2021. So U.S. CENTCOM oversees U.S. military operations in the Middle East. So you would assume that Israel was under there, but because Israel doesn't have relations with many of the U.S.'s Arab allies, they were under U.S. European command. But after they normalized with the UAE and Bahrain, then now they've switched to CENTCOM, and since then the U.S. has really been stepping up military cooperation with Israel, even more so. And this is a huge example of that. I mean, this is pretty major, it seems like. And then the U.S. and Israel's ultimate goal is to expand normalization with more Gulf states to form an anti-Iran NATO-style alliance. So we'll see how that all shakes out. So Netanyahu, he's been pushing for normalization with Saudi Arabia, but they're insisting that won't happen until the Palestinians are granted their own state. And there's no sign that that's going to happen anytime soon. But they have been quietly increasing cooperation. For example, I think it was in 2021, right after Israel was brought under CENTCOM, the U.S. led military drills that included Israel and Saudi Arabia. It was the first time they ever publicly, uh, held military drills together. Okay, so the next one here, speaking of the Israeli government, this is related to kind of the situation that Netanyahu is facing with this Arya Deri, who was a minister in his government, but Israel's Supreme Court ruled that due to his criminal record, he was convicted of tax evasion or something like that. He had to step down from the government, but his party, the Shah's party, they're an ultra orthodox party. We're threatening that if Netanyahu removes him, then it could really they could step down, and then there would have to be that would be a major thing for the Netanyahu government. And but anyway, sorry, I kind of rambled there. So this is from Haaretz. Coalition members from all factions participated on Monday in this. Shah's party had a meeting in the Knesset, and Netanyahu attended, and he said, "We're going to do everything we can to bring him back into the government, to bring Deri back into the government." I don't know really what Netanyahu can do here, but I think what he's doing is just showing, I'm on your side here. Don't break up this coalition. I'm going to do what I can to make sure that we can give him some kind of position in the government. Um, all right, the next one here. Poland says that they're going to seek Germany's approval to send tanks to Ukraine. So more of this tank drama. Poland's prime minister said on Monday that Warsaw will formally seek permission from Berlin to send German-made Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. He said they're going to apply for such permission, but also if Germany does not grant this permission, he said Poland would still try to send the tanks as part of a small coalition of countries. So Poland has said that it's willing to provide about 14 of these Leopard 2 tanks, which is far short of the several hundred that Ukrainian military officials say they need. Leopards are operated by multiple European countries, and others have signaled their willingness to send the tanks, including Finland. So while Germany has come under all this criticism for being hesitant to send its own Leopard tanks, for not doing so, and they haven't been very enthusiastic about the idea of other countries sending the tanks, but nobody's formally requested permission to send them yet. And it's not really clear what's going to happen. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, he's argued against sending the tanks over fears of escalating the war into a direct clash between Russia and NATO. But then you have other German officials saying that they won't get in the way if other countries want to send these Leopards. So German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock on Sunday, when she was asked what would happen if Poland decided to send the tanks, and she said, quote, "At the moment, the question has not been asked. But if it were asked, we would not stand in the way," end quote. However, the following day, on Monday, a spokesman for the German government signaled that she was not speaking, Baerbock was not speaking for the German government, saying that there are agreed procedures on how to send the tanks. And according to Politico, Germany's Security Council would need to agree on approving the tank deliveries. And this government spokesman said that the government should not rush such a major decision. He said, quote, "These are hard questions of life and death. We have to ask what this means for the defense of our own country," end quote. So again, he said that on Monday. So that kind of signals that they're not going to approve this, that there's enough opposition in the government that they're not going to agree. So who knows? But Germany's caution, and they haven't had that much caution. I mean, they just pledged to send these armored vehicles. I forget the name of them, but they're similar to the U.S. Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. And if you actually look at the chart of the countries that have pledged military aid to Ukraine, Germany is second behind the U.S. in the amount of money when it comes to the military equipment and what it's worth. They've pledged much less than the U.S., but still more than any other European country. But it doesn't matter because they're not sending these tanks. Everybody's really angry with them in Ukraine and all the hawks in the West. And really demonstrating this there was an article in the Washington Post by their editorial board that was titled, "Germany is refusing to send tanks to Ukraine. Biden cannot let this stand." So it kind of shows you the attitude of what, these people think Germany should be doing and how they must listen to the U.S. So again, we'll see how this all shakes out. It's not over yet. The next article here. So this is actually this is from Politico. From Politico, the EU version, which normally I wouldn't really run an article on, but I kind of ran out of time. And it's about corruption in Ukraine. Their defense minister Reznikov has come under fire as a corruption probe rocks Ukraine. So some sort of anti-corruption body in Ukraine has alleged that the defense ministry, the people were profiting off of the sale of some goods. So Ukraine's defense minister, Oleksiy Reznikov, one of the most prominent faces of the war against Russia, is now under fire on the home front as investigations into government corruption rocked the country over the weekend. So there's been two probes into corruption, and both of the inquiries are related to war profiteering and triggered an immediate pledge of action from Zelensky on Sunday night in his address. The case involving the defense ministry involved multiple purchases of military rations at inflated prices, a topic that has snowballed into top news in Kiev. Almost simultaneously, the deputy infrastructure minister was fired in a case linked to an overpriced public purchase of electrical generators. So they're charging more for things that they're buying, so somebody's making money. But Reznikov is denying it. He's the head of the defense ministry. It says he does not personally sign off on the defense food and catering contract, but he's ultimately responsible because he's the head of the defense ministry, and he's totally denying it. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And then the other one, this deputy infrastructure minister was fired after this anti-corruption body reported that the deputy minister was busted while accepting a $400,000 bribe for facilitating an overpriced power generating equipment purchase. So this was in September. So there might be more of this. And, with all this money that they're flooding into Ukraine, I bet there's more examples of this. And, Ukraine is notoriously a corrupt government. You used to hear a lot about it in Western media before Russia invaded, before the U.S. pledged over $100 billion to spend on this war. And these anti-corruption bodies that they have, part of the reason they have them is because the EU and NATO used to say, "Oh, Ukraine can't join us until they're too corrupt." Basically, they have to work on their corruption. And the head of the Servant of the People's Party in the Ukrainian parliament, that's Zelensky's party, said that some of the corrupt officials could face jail terms. So again, we'll see how it plays out. But I just bet there's so many more examples of that, considering all the money and the lack of oversight. That's all the money that's been pouring in with virtually no oversight. I want to take this moment to mention again, it is our fundraiser, and the great Roger Waters has pledged up to $20,000 in matching funds, and it's only what we can raise just this week. So we don't have much time to secure this. So a lot of our staff is working really hard to try to get donations this week. And I hope you guys can pitch in and help out, because this is a huge amount of money for us. We're a small operation, and he's really stepping up to offer this money, but we need to raise it. We need to match it. So please go to antiwar.com/donate to help us out. And this is how we get by, is that we rely on our readers, and we rely on people like Roger Waters who have the money that could put up big donations and think this, the coverage that we provide is important enough to do so. And, he really speaks out against, the dangerous policy of arming Ukraine and supporting this war right on Russia's border. So join Roger Waters, go to antiwar.com/donate, and please help us out so we could, finish this fundraiser and we could focus on our work. All right, the next article here. Russia says that there are still no plans for New START talks with the U.S. So this is, unfortunate. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov on Monday said that there are still no dates set for talks between the U.S. and Russia on what is the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the two powers, and that is the New START treaty. So the U.S. and Russia, they were set to meet on the treaty in November. They were going to meet in Cairo, Egypt. They used to do these types of things in Geneva, but Russia doesn't think they're neutral anymore over there. So they were going to meet in Egypt, but Russia postponed the talks, citing U.S. military support for Ukraine. And much earlier in the war, the U.S. and Russia were engaged in more broad arms control negotiations before the invasion. After Russia invaded, the U.S. canceled them. And then for months and months, Russia was saying they could resume them, but the U.S. said, didn't want to. And then they got these talks ready on the New START, but then Russia postponed them. And Ryabkov, he said the conditions are not right for the New START talks due to a recent escalation by the U.S., due to recent escalations in general. And I've been talking about a lot of those escalations, billions and billions in new military aid, the new armored fighting vehicles, and this talk of them supporting an offensive on Crimea. So Ryabkov said, quote, "The present situation is discouraging for setting a new date, especially considering this escalation trend both in the U.S. actions and rhetoric," end quote. So New START limits the deployment of missiles, warheads, and bombers, and it includes an inspection regime. But those inspections have been suspended since March 2020 due to COVID-19. And the future negotiations, they were expected to focus on resuming inspections. That would have been a good start, and then build from there. One of Biden's first foreign policy moves, believe it or not, was in January 2021. He got on the phone, he called Putin, and he said, "Hey, let's extend the New START treaty," because it was due to expire in February. It looked like the Trump administration was going to let it lapse as they pulled out of other arms control treaties. But Biden came in and said, "Hey, let's renew it." And I thought it was a good sign of things to come. At least he would favor arms control with Russia. But of course, that's all fallen apart. And I was naive to think that. So the treaty is due to expire in 2026, so in about 3 years. But since Biden and Putin agreed on the extension, the U.S. and Russia have made no progress on arms control. And there's no sign that they're going to be negotiating a replacement anytime soon. And who knows how long this war is going to last. And this failure to hold New START talks, it reflects the overall lack of diplomacy between the U.S. and Russia since the war started. While there have been some high-level talks, the State Department has essentially abandoned diplomacy with Moscow. Blinken, the Secretary of State, he's only held one known call with his Russian counterpart, and that was about a prisoner swap, not about the war in Ukraine. Complete failure as a diplomat at Blinken. Okay, so the next article here, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, says that the West's hybrid war on Russia is becoming a real war. So Lavrov said this in South Africa on Monday. He said that the conflict in Ukraine is no longer a hybrid war between Russia and the West, but is turning into a real war. So he said this at a press conference with his South African counterpart, saying that the West has been preparing a war against Russia for a long time. He claimed the goal was to, quote, destroy everything Russian from language to culture that has been in Ukraine for centuries and to prohibit people from speaking their mother tongue, end quote. Lavrov and other Russian officials have repeatedly made clear that they believe they are not just fighting Ukrainian forces, but also the US and NATO. Ukrainian officials have also reflected this view, with Reznikov, the defense minister, recently saying that Ukrainians are shedding blood for a NATO mission. That has big implications for, Russia having, the pretext to launch an attack on a NATO country if they choose to take things to that level. They have the pretext for it. And it just shows how dangerous this situation is. Lavrov also on Monday, he blamed the US and its allies for the failure of peace talks that were held way back in the beginning of the war in March 2022 after Russia and Ukraine held talks in Istanbul. They followed up with virtual talks, but then Boris Johnson went over to Kiev and told Zelensky, don't negotiate, even if you want to sign a deal. The collective West, as this Ukrainian media report put it, is not ready. So Lavrov said, quote, it is well known that we supported the proposal of the Ukrainian side to negotiate early in the special military operation, and by the end of March, the two delegations agreed on the principle to settle the conflict, end quote. And then he's saying that the U.S., British, and European countries told Ukraine that it was too early to do a deal with Russia, so that's that. And as things stand today, the chance of peace talks are highly unlikely. You have Ukraine demanding a Russian withdrawal and war crimes tribunals before talks could even happen. And then you have Russia saying any deal must include the territories they annex joining Russia. So two sides are so far apart. All right, the next one here, bipartisanship. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy plans to visit Taiwan. So this is according to a report from Punchbowl News. It said that the new House Speaker is planning to visit Taiwan later this year, and the Pentagon is preparing for his trip. The report said that the trip would likely take place in the spring, and the Biden administration is looking to be more proactive about McCarthy's visit than it was when Nancy Pelosi traveled to Taipei back in August, if you remember that. Talk about that a lot. So Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was viewed, as a major provocation, and it sparked the largest ever Chinese military drills around Taiwan. I guess McCarthy, wants to do something similar over there. And these exercises included China firing missiles over Taiwan and simulating a blockade of the island, two things they never did before. That was a consequence of Pelosi going over there. And China has kept up the military pressure. And, again, as I cover a lot, China's military activity around Taiwan has really increased as the U.S. has been increasing its support for Taiwan. And they view the House Speaker visiting Taiwan as an affront to the One China policy. So proponents of Pelosi's visit, when she went to Taiwan, they argued that there is a precedent because Newt Gingrich went there in 1997, back when he was the House Speaker. But if you look at the state of U.S.-China relations, they were much better back in 97. When he went there, he visited he traveled there. I don't know if he went directly from mainland China, but he visited China before he visited Taiwan. And he discussed his trip to Taiwan with Chinese officials. Do you imagine a member of Congress going to China today? They would get labeled, all the things they would get labeled for doing something like that. So McCarthy and other Republicans have said that they will make confronting China a priority as they now have control of the House, and they established a new committee to deal with China issues. But increasing support for Taiwan has bipartisan support as the Biden administration continues to take steps to boost ties with Taipei, despite warnings from China that the issue is a red line. So the 2023 NDAA that has military aid for Taiwan, unprecedented military aid, China responded to that by launching more major drills around Taiwan. And McCarthy's visit will almost certainly spark more Chinese military pressure on Taiwan. I mean, maybe even more so than Pelosi's did. Maybe they'll try to do something else to show them, You can't keep sending these house speakers over here. Who knows what's going to happen? It's getting to the point where something, I mean, really bad could happen, but they just keep going in this direction. Again, this is still just a report, but it was reported by a few other media outlets as well that McCarthy plans to go. And of course, if he goes and it sparks more military activity in the area, that the China hawks in Washington, they're going to use that to justify more support for Taiwan. That's this cycle of escalation that we have found ourselves in here. All right, the last news story here. Erdogan, the Turkish president, says that Turkey will not support Sweden's NATO bid over a protest. So Erdogan said this on Monday, that Sweden should not expect support from Ankara on its NATO bid in response to anti-Islam protests that took place in Sweden over the weekend. So demonstrators burned Qurans in front of the Turkish embassy on Saturday, and Erdogan said that Stockholm should not have allowed the protest to take place at that location. He said, quote, "It is clear that those who allowed such vileness to take place in front of our embassy can no longer expect any charity from us regarding their NATO membership application," end quote. So pro-Kurdish demonstrations also took place in Sweden over the weekend, and Erdogan said that they were demonstrating in support of the PKK, which Turkey and the EU also consider it to be a terrorist organization. He said, quote, "So you will let terror organizations run wild on your avenues and streets and then expect our support for getting into NATO? That's not happening," end quote. So Turkey has delayed both Sweden and Finland's NATO bids, mainly over their alleged support for the PKK. Erdogan has been demanding Sweden approve more extraditions to Turkey and has been critical of Stockholm's cooperation. But his comments on Monday were his strongest yet. This is the strongest thing he said about their NATO bids since signing that deal with Sweden. So we'll see what happens here. And his comments, this could be all part of his re-election campaign. The Turkish presidential election is either going to be held in May or June. And a spokesman for Erdogan recently said that they don't want to bring this NATO issue to Turkey's parliament ahead of these elections. While Erdogan made no mention of Finland on Monday, the two Nordic nations have said that their NATO bids are linked and that they would not join the alliance without each other. So Turkey and Hungary are the only two NATO countries that have not yet approved Sweden and Finland's NATO bids, although the Hungarian parliament is expected to hold a vote soon, and they're expected to approve it, but who knows what will happen. So we'll see. I mean, it sounds like Turkey might, just not approve their NATO bid altogether. And so that could be good. It could prevent NATO expansion more so on Russia's border, because Finland has an over 800-mile border with Russia. But again, I think ultimately Turkey might try to get some serious concessions out of the US and NATO, other NATO members on some issues. Could still be part of that game. We'll see how it plays out. That's it for the news. Go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Brett Wilkins about Julian Assange. Freedom for Assange and journalism are at stake. We have one from Thomas Knapp. World War III isn't coming. We've been living it all of our lives. We have one from Kelly Vlahos over at the American Conservative, Creating a Russian Boogeyman. That's about the Twitter files and all the Russiagate nonsense that was revealed by Matt Taibbi's latest release. We have one from Jacob Hornberger over at the Future Freedom Foundation. What about the unprovoked U.S. aggression against Iraq? And then our spotlight is from Branko March Teach over at Responsible Statecraft. Mission Creep, how the U.S. role in Ukraine has slowly escalated. But that is it for me for today. Again, please help us out securing those funds from Roger Waters. It's really huge for us. Go to antiwar.com/donate and tell your friends about antiwar.com and share the show, like and subscribe on YouTube. All that stuff helps. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.